to another episode of the Puncher's Chance podcast. I'm John Lodge, coming to you from the Sports Lodge, joined as always by Jordan Granke, coming to you from Castle Granke. Jordan, that's a pretty slick sweater you got on there. So what's that all about?
Supporting Canadian music, pretty nice little thing this company is doing to help benefit artists through different companies. One of them that I support is called Unison Benevolent Fund. Helps focuses a lot on artists and their mental health. So the more money they get, the better. And I needed a new hoodie. Need to get my double XL on a little bit, and fall colors and what else is nice green sweater. So yeah, and I look at the beaver rocking the.
It's a pretty sick logo, man. I like it.
It's pretty cool, man.
I got to get me one of those. So yeah, it's been a rough week for me. I got a little bit of a cold. Finally getting over it. So that's why we're recording a little bit later, ladies and gentlemen. You did definitely not want to hear me a few days ago. You could barely understand a word I was saying. So I would have had to text the whole show to Jordan. But yeah, Jordan, we've had a big week of news, and we kind of got a little lucky. We'll get into everything that's happening. But any news from Castle Granke? Anything special happening in your life this week?
You know, man, just getting by this whole thing. Lots of changes. We've been kind of focusing everyone else on the debate and what's going on in the kind of international politics and stuff like that. I was all about learning about this fly today on Pence's head and just kind of running through the gamuts, man. But again, sports is on fire. A lot of stuff going on with the NFL. A lot of game. There just seems to be just like really none of that like small, contract talk and rumors that you hear about. There's plenty of that still, but all the news coming out of sports right now seems to be really, really big news. So I'm just trying to keep up with it all.
Yeah, lots of headline stuff going on. We're going to have Tuesday night football. So strange. Now, and I'm not even going to get into the semantics of it because it might not actually happen if the Tennessee Titans can't get their shit together. But yeah, it'll be so weird. And only 3 teams in NFL history have played back-to-back Monday night games. Well, 2 teams, and there will be 3 as of Monday if the Patriots do indeed play. The Chiefs were the second team last week playing the Patriots. So some interesting times in football for sure. Definitely interesting times in the world of MMA as well. On today's episode, we are once again talking about Conor McGregor. Huge news dropping today. Some drama again between Izzy and Bones. Mark Hunt in the headlines yet again. Yeah. And Cory Anderson finally has his first fight booked in Bellator. So we got lots to get into, Jordan. But first and foremost, let's get into the most important thing, the headline, the big news that dropped today. Conor McGregor has agreed on a fight contract with the UFC. He will be facing Dustin the Diamond Poirier, and the fight was originally scheduled for, I believe, the 23rd of January. That was what it was offered from the UFC, but Conor McGregor has made a formal request. He wants to fight in 2020, and he wants to be on either the November pay-per-view card or the December pay-per-view card. What do you think about this, Jordan?
It's great. We've been pushing for a long time for Conor to get a fight. This guy has been hungry. He's back. He seems focused. We've seen him with the odd little rumor here and there, but very focused. He looks like he's in phenomenal shape. He's just been begging for a fight. He had to kind of push his own agenda here. He had to make it happen himself. But I think that, it was a great call. Very, 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 very worthy opponent. Somebody he's faced before in a different division. But I love this. I love when there's Conor McGregor drama. I don't like it. When there's Conor McGregor fight confirmations or fight talk or fight planning, I get really, really excited. There is no event like a Conor McGregor fight. There never has been. And from someone who is an unabashedly big, huge Conor fan, I can't wait for this.
Yeah, it definitely was shocking as I woke up from my coma earlier in the day where I was sleeping for 13 or 14 hours, and to all these tweets and messages from all my buddies and messages from you and everyone telling me the news about Conor McGregor, and I had to do some research. I didn't quite believe it until I read it for myself, and I am super excited for this fight, man. I can remember back when I said I didn't want to see Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor, but you know what? I want to see Conor McGregor. And I'm not discrediting Dustin Poirier because he's an excellent fighter. He throws knuckles. He's exciting every time he gets into the octagon, and so is Conor. So this fight should be what everyone is hoping for. This fight should be massive for both guys. And good on Conor, man, for still donating $500,000 to Dustin's charity, and Dustin saying they're going to get a gym built in DC in his neighborhood so that they can get kids with good grades in there, and free training for MMA and all that sort of good stuff. So that, you know, a heartwarming aspect to this as well. But my big question here to you, Jordan, is, was this just an excellent game of chicken played by the McGregor camp?
It is. I think it was a genius piece of marketing. You know, it's Connor has this ability to do this. Like, he kind of makes it seem like he's got such clout, and there's one thing that Jon Jones does that doesn't do that Conor McGregor does so well. Jon Jones likes to call his shots out on Twitter. Be like, I want this, I want to do this, UFC do this, and the UFC just go, sure, John. Like, what? And every time Jon Jones calls his shot, whether it's somebody he wants to fight or what he wants to do, the UFC doesn't budge. When Conor McGregor suggests for a second that they're going to get him and Dustin Poirier in a gym in Ireland for charity that we discussed, the whole thing just reeked of good. We love Conor. We love watching him compete. It won't be for real. It'll be an exhibition, but it will pull everyone back into Conor. And in Conor's world, a bunch of money will be made, and they're going to give that money to charity. And he's going to treat Dustin Poirier and his family like royalty when they're there. So the UFC had no other choice. So then the UFC turns around and gives both guys a contract. Well, Conor will fight anyone at any weight class at any time. Dustin Poirier is fucking as game as they come. They both signed the contract almost ASAP. Conor wants to change one part of it. He wants it to not be in January. He wants it to be this year, especially in lieu of these cancellations. So Conor literally went from the UFC basically refusing to give him a fight because they're worried about his draw at the door. I think John in previous episodes have nailed it on the head. You get basically losing $10 million as soon as you have a Conor McGregor fight, because you don't get that at the gate. Now, the UFC has just kind of said, fuck it, right? We can't make any more excuses. He wants to fight. He's chomping at the bit. And if we don't do something here, obviously he's going to. There's nothing legally stopping him from having that exhibition with Dustin, and the UFC know it. So they said, before that happens again, before we lose out on the opportunity to profit off that, let's make it happen. So the UFC kind of shot themselves in the foot here. It's definitely a ultimate power play by McGregor Sports Entertainment. They have forced the UFC's hand. There's no if or buts about it, you know. And all the stuff that Dana White said in reaction to the Conor McGregor allegations and the DMs that were kind of posted around, like, Dana White said, I have all these plans for Conor, but he blew it. I didn't buy that for a second. I don't think Conor did either. He's making his own moves, and again, the UFC's chasing after him like usual. So it's nice to see that the Conor McGregor UFC relationship has kind of found its balance again.
Yeah. Now, you hit on something that I want to expand on. You said that there was nothing stopping them from being able to pull this exhibition off. Now, I had an interesting conversation earlier today with somebody who told me the exact opposite, that there was no way they were going to be able to get this done. So, just for the sake of clearing the air,
yep.
If this did not happen, if Poirier versus McGregor in the octagon wasn't signed today, was it legally possible for, one, Conor McGregor to face off against Dustin Poirier in an exhibition, and two, face off against Manny Pacquiao in a boxing match without the UFC getting a piece?
The Manny Pacquiao thing I know a little bit less about than I do about the idea of an exhibition bout, right? So what you have is a lot of UFC fighters, and for better or for worse, go and do outside of UFC competitions. You see it a lot with grappling. There's Submission Underground. There's Flow Grappling. Kenny Florian, Chael Sonnen does Submission Underground, and they're allowing UFC fighters to go over there and compete. And then recently, Cub Swanson actually tore, I think it was his MCL in his knee, and the UFC kind of said, okay, whoa, this might not be, you know, if they're going to start hurting our guys, it's going to be different. Famously, Jon Jones did compete against Dan Henderson in a Submission Underground thing where fans came out and just watched them grapple. There is the Ali Act, which, without boring people, a lot of the details are that you can't stifle anyone's, you know, you can kind of limit how they participate in combat or participate in their sport, but you couldn't even stop necessarily Ezekiel Elliott from going out and playing baseball on the weekends, or going out and doing a home run derby for charity. There's nothing that stops athletes from doing that, because the NFL or the UFC don't own those athletes. The actual boxing thing, where Manny Pacquiao, it would go on to a boxing record. There's likely something, especially post Floyd Mayweather, that will be tied up into Conor's contract, where he can't just go out and box. Or if he does, the UFC might have a matching clause, or have a first right of refusal. Is pretty common in any contract, whether it's music or film or competition. What could have happened is they could have gone and had two UFC athletes. They may have not been able to say UFC on the posters, and there might be a lot of stipulations with trademarks. But by all means, they could have sold tickets to a gym and done the whole thing for charity. They could have maybe put it on for pay-per-view. And as long as it wasn't official competition, they would have likely had to have worn headgear. It may have just been a glorified sparring match. But either way, I think Conor just wanted to compete, and then he was going to do whatever it could. But the legalities of it, you've seen it. Conor was allowed to go back to his old boxing gym, Crumlin Boxing Gym, have 150 people in there pre-COVID to watch him spar, boxing only, and he donated all those ticket sales to a local charity as well. So he's already done this, maybe not with another UFC person, but he's done this. And plenty of UFC fighters have gone and competed in grappling and submission tournaments. Because if anything, it just makes the UFC performances better. So this is the first time you saw it with two like high level athletes who could already draw themselves. But I think the legalities of it, they could have, Dustin can go to Dublin whenever he wants. Now COVID's a different situation, but like, he can travel, and you can go to gyms even and train with other people. And if you want to make money off that sparring session, go ahead. It would be interesting. There may be a lot of cease and desist stuff going on to avoid all that. I think this is why you're seeing the contract go out. But I could see them pulling it off. Maybe the television rights to those superstars or their likeness. It would all depends on their contract, and a lot of people aren't even allowed to look at those fighter contracts. So, but it's not impossible. It would all depend on their contract, their likeness rights, all that kind of stuff. So it would be interesting, but I don't think it would be impossible.
All right. Well, before we get out of the McGregor stuff, I just have one more point, and I don't know a lot about this. And the loss at the gate, that's a huge punch in the gut for the UFC. Everyone knows that. If you're a businessman and you hear an automatic $10 million loss, then you're going to want to build something maybe into the contract where you recover a little bit of that. Now, I don't know if McGregor or Poirier would be okay with that, but my thing is are they locked into a pay-per-view price for me to buy? Or could the UFC say, hey, you know what? Let's jack up the pay-per-view price by $5, $10 and make it back that way.
My man, I was having this conversation about an hour before we went to air with another friend of mine, just for the sake of it. I said, how much? I'm just curious. And my friend's a very casual friend. He loves fights, but doesn't get into the intricacies like we do. I said, last time we paid $60, I think it was for the pay-per-view before the Costa Adesanya one. So we paid for it. It was a good night of fights, but like ultimately didn't have that like luster of it was DC Stipe. So it was a good card. O'Malley was on there, and we kind of felt like we got our money's worth for $60. Now I said, every time we bought a Conor McGregor fight, because we usually buy them together and have our families over and such. I said, how much extra would you pay to watch Conor? My buddy was like, $20. Like, I don't even care. As long as I see him do his walk and cut his promo and even all the build up, he's like, I love that shit. And like, that's, I'd pay $20 extra. And I'm going, well, the UFC only needs $5. But I also think it's interesting because from what I understand now, Abu Dhabi is kind of footing a lot of the UFC's production costs in their bill. In exchange for the UFC and the ESPN coverage, every other commercial is Visit Abu Dhabi, and their streaming and on their actual broadcast. So there's a lot of advertising and in-kind sort of donations happening. That's why I think it might be, okay, fuck it. Let's bring Conor over. Let's do 2.5 million pay-per-view buys and not worry about the gate and not worry about hiring people to do the gate, and just let it be money over money over money. My other buddy had an even better proposition. He said lower the pay-per-view and then market the shit out of that. He's like, you know what you do? You say, for this, we love you, fans. Thank you for sticking with us. If it's the December 12th card and it's the last card of the year, the UFC thanks you so much. We're going to do this at a discounted rate of like $45 instead of 60. And then you might get double the people that buy it because it's $15 cheaper. So I don't know, but I think you could. You could either raise it. I would say you should probably raise it because it's Conor, and you might make a lot of that gate back, I think.
Yeah, and then you wouldn't, like you said, you hit it on it. You wouldn't have to pay the ushers and the arena fees and all
Right.
that sort of nonsense, right? That's all already been taken care of. Okay, so moving on from one guy who is no stranger to drama to another couple of dudes who are no stranger to drama. We've got some heat in between the Israel.
Adesanya.
Adesanya, as I try to get this right. I was
Me
remembering
too.
Izzy Adesanya and Jon Jones. They got into a little bit of a Twitter spat, and you alerted me to this. I had to check it out. And man, if I'm giving you my opinion before I let you break this down for everybody, I gotta say this: I lost a little bit of respect for Izzy in this exchange, and that's hard for me to say because if you watch this show, you know that I don't have a lot of respect for Jon Jones and how he
Yeah.
holds himself, and it's hard for me to say Jon Jones walked out the gentleman in this exchange.
You know, it takes a few bold statements. I know that Izzy warned us. He said that he's going to be quarantining for the next 2 weeks. Can't see anybody, so Twitter needs to look the fuck out. I think he said something along those lines. So I'm not surprised, but I am surprised with, talking about family members. It's always been a sensitive thing, Jon Jones has pushed the envelope sometimes, being like, "Oh yeah, like, I'm going to be your dad," and then I remember he said that to Daniel Cormier. I remember being like, "Oh, John, that's a shitty thing to do," because his dad died like right in front of him, and it's like a shitty thing to say. But I will say this: there's always been kind of a folklore story of Jon Jones setting up a conference call through Dana White just to apologize to Daniel Cormier about saying those comments, having no idea about his backstory. Now, Izzy doesn't get away with that because he already paid his respects when Jon Jones lost his mother, and somewhat recently. And for him to go after his mom and say the things he did to his mom, that's where, and coming from someone who's lost a parent, you know, there's no bigger scar you're ever going to feel in your life than that. And I agree with you, man. I thought, it's entertainment until it's super personal. And when it was the Irish attacking, the Dagestani people, even I thought, man, Conor's in a dark place. And it crossed the line of sportsmanship. But this was just personal, a personal attack. It was too messy. It was too brutal. There's too much awe and shock to it. It rubbed me the wrong way, and I love this entertainment part of the sport, but it takes a pretty shitty action to make Jon Jones look like the better man sometimes. And I don't know, maybe Izzy took the bait and John can laugh it all the way to the bank, but man, I did not like a lot of the things that Izzy said. I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's an even worse look and a hypocritical look against Adesanya after he went out and said Kobe Covington and other fighters shouldn't be allowed to say the things they're saying at press
Right.
conferences, and then you go and you mouth off and say something so shitty as that. So, you gotta walk the walk if you want to talk the talk, right? And
Yeah.
unfortunately for me, Izzy fell off on this one,
Yeah.
and maybe he does apologize to John. Maybe there's a conference call where in quiet that he realizes he did something he shouldn't have done. But until we hear about that, until there's some sort of leak in that, you've lost respect in my eyes. You are still one of the greatest fighters, and that I
Absolutely.
cannot take away from you. But I can take away my fandom, and that is what I did with Jon Jones, and I'm doing the same with Izzy.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I don't want to enable people's behavior, and I know that the traction they're getting on this on all the major sports networks is kind of like, ugh, I'd rather you guys get all the attention for your skills. What I will say is, this is gonna be a little strange. It's been a long time since I've remembered Jon Jones being the hero. And then are we gonna then all of a sudden forget that he's a huge douchebag? Is this gonna kind of trick us in a way if he takes the moral high ground here? Um, But what I do find it interesting is that this is the first opponent I've seen since, I don't know, maybe Gus or DC, that's really made me think, oh man, like, we got a guy that can beat Jon Jones. What I think is even good about this is that I care about this fight more than I've ever cared about it. It was always kind of cool to happen. Izzy won't have a strong contender for a fight or two, right? Because Darren Till lost to Whitaker. Whitaker's got Cannonier, right? I'm say let them figure this out. It's a crazy time, and the UFC cares about big business right now. I say fuck it, make this fight, make it at like 208 pounds, like, or cap it. Do some crazy catch weight, even though you don't want to do it, or do it at 205. Have John go back down and Izzy go up. I don't know. I think that they got to do this fight now. I'm like thirsting for this fight now, and I knew it was going to happen maybe one day, but then John going to heavyweight, and I'm like, do this fight now. These two guys will never be this full of heat again.
Yeah, this is bordering, and I think you brought this up. This is bordering McGregor Nurmagomedov.
It is really
in the heat that is building up.
Yeah.
And if it isn't quelled in the time coming, then I can only see it getting bigger and bigger. And the UFC seeing dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs. And we've talked about super fights getting fans back in arenas, but if you can't and you need to up the pay-per-view buys, then this is the way to up the pay-per-view buys, right?
They can do fights in New Zealand right now. If Jon Jones goes over to New Zealand, they can do an arena show.
So one thing you hit, when was the last time Jon Jones was the hero? And will we forget that he was a massive douchebag? And no, but what I think this does, and if he continues along this path, it's step one to a reclamation of your personality, right? What we saw with Jon Jones was a supremely talented, very young man who lost control and started reading the headlines, believing the hype. And when you start believing the hype, you think you're a god, you think you're untouchable, and you do things that are wrong. And you know what? Jon Jones is now he's a fully grown adult man. And yes, does he still act like that? Sometimes he does. But I guarantee if you went to Jon and you had an honest conversation off the record, that he would tell you that he regrets some of the things that he did.
Without a doubt.
And he has a 10-year-old daughter, daughter that he has to look at her. She looks up to him. And there are things that he would not want her to know, or not want her to look at him and look down at him for the things that he did. So to condemn him for the things that he did in the past, we have to still be able to raise him up for being for changing himself. We talk the same about Conor McGregor and his transition, and will he continue and be a better man? We have to be able to offer the same to other men who have fallen down a darker path. I don't want to hammer this too much, but you said that you want this fight.
I do now.
Ever see this fight actually?
I don't know. I think that what's likely going to happen is Jon has teased this heavyweight move for a very, very long time. And generally when Jon commits to something, he actually does it. You know, that's the one thing you can't say about him.
It's a Jon thing. It's a Jon thing.
It's a Jon thing. Yeah. Like he just does it. But like, even if Jon, like, you know, he needs this test. The reason why he fucks around so much at 205, he thought he was invincible, you know, doing cocaine the week of a fight and stuff like that. This heavyweight thing is going to be a challenge. I think you're going to see a motivated Jon Jones, and maybe the best Jon Jones you've ever seen. Izzy's small for 185. I can't see him competing with Jon anything, you know, north of 200 pounds, maybe. But Izzy's going to grow a little bit, but Izzy's not that young. Izzy's younger than he looks. Izzy's like in his 30s. Like, he's not a young pup. He's got to be 32. If not, he's 34, but he just came to the sport. He had, you know, he had 90 something fights before he even got here. So it's one of those things where it's deceiving that, Israel Adesanya is not as young as you think. Which is why I feel like this fight needs to happen now before they're both 35, 36, but it's always going to be in the tank after what's been said. You know, if they sold the Conor McGregor Cowboy Cerrone fight through press conference comments that happened 4 years before, they can definitely turn around and sell this, because mark my words, when Jon Jones gets the opportunity to speak into a microphone, through the journalism, through the press, there's the first thing any of them are going to ask him about is going to be this. Like, Jon's lucky that it's quarantine, and he's doesn't really have a fight booked. You know, he's technically taking a step away from the sport for a while. but the first microphone in front of his face, the first question out of the first reporter is going to be about Izzy. And this is not going to go anytime soon, but I think that the fever pitch right now is so hot, and Izzy is on fire after that Costa masterpiece of a performance that it's just time. Like, let's see what these, like, let's, make it a catch weight. I don't know, 200 and whatever. I don't know. I haven't thought about that much, but I think that the time is now.
Okay, so before we get into the Izzy Jones talk, does the name Alex Pereira ring a bell to you?
Alex Pereira.
Glory middleweight kickboxing champion.
He's the guy that knocked out Izzy.
The only man to knock out
Boom.
Izzy Adesanya.
On the spot, John Lodge.
he has said that Izzy doesn't want any piece of him anymore. Is that the truth?
Of Jon Jones?
No, of Izzy wants no piece of Alex Pereira. That's what he says.
You call that, what's Alex Pereira doing right now?
He's still the Glory middleweight champion, kickboxing champion.
Oh shit, is he? I thought maybe is he? I thought maybe he kind of faded off in non-existence. If he's still, I mean, I can't imagine he would. When Izzy was a full-time kickboxer, he got the best. He got the best of them. So when Izzy's kind of now also kickboxing, also boxing, also striking, also jiu-jitsu, also clinch work, also wrestling, I think with kickboxing, that the best kickboxers in the world are the best kickboxers in the world because all they do is kickbox. That's why we're never going to see Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao or anybody but James Toney likely in a UFC cage, because you'll get taken down and choked out in a matter of a minute. And so, because you have a lot more things to think about. So Alex Pereira, I hope he still kicks ass in Glory and K1 and the stuff that he's doing, but like, I'm sure Izzy doesn't want any piece of you because he's no longer focused on your singular version of combat sports.
So that would be the only reason. A little bit of shade there dropped on Pereira from Jordan Granke, but you know what? I kind of agree because I read the article. I read a little bit about Pereira, and he said he dabbles in MMA, but he is focused on his craft and what he is successful at. And you know what? If you're the champ, why would you focus on anything else? Right?
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
Focus on your division. But if he comes at me, I'm not worried about it because, John, you and I, my friend, we have a puncher's chance.
All right. So speaking of dream fights, after talking Izzy and Bones, that's a dream fight that'll probably never happen. Is Bones versus Lesnar?
Yeah.
But Lesnar finds himself back in the headlines again this week for a fight that he had 4 years ago at UFC 200 against Mark Hunt, and Mark Hunt is claiming that the UFC willfully colluded with Brock Lesnar to allow a dirty fighter to compete to make money. Mark Hunt's claims have been thrown out of court a couple times. He's on his last appeal for this, but I don't want to talk about the legal aspects of this, but I did want to talk to you about where do you stand on this? Are you standing with Mark Hunt or are you standing with the UFC?
I'm a bit of a, as they call it, a corporate Joe or whatever you want to say. Like I'm a UFC, I'm a big UFC guy. Like I think that for better or for worse, I'm just a fan. I'm actually with Mark Hunt on this one. I think that there's questions, but I'm with Mark Hunt, not 150%, but I'm most of the way there. The thing is, UFC 200 was going to have this big push, and it's not the UFC's fault that Brock played them for as much money as possible, which made them kind of accelerate the testing pool for USADA at the time. And that's kind of the vast majority of Mark Hunt's claims, that the UFC knew that he'd piss hot and decided to do whatever they could to make them exempt from the USADA testing pool, which is kind of true. Like, Brock Lesnar didn't get tested as much as other people. When he did get tested, those samples weren't going to get there pre-fight, but they were there they definitely came after the fight, and we have not seen Brock since. Whereas Jon Jones gets a little tainted sample, some of that Mexican concoction, he pops hot for it. He gets taken out. Daniel Cormier's got to fight, fucking Anderson Silva on 2 days' notice. You know what I mean? So like it's a double standard, and it's pretty easy to see, which is why I side with Mark Hunt. Do I think the UFC could have done any better with Lesnar in that situation? No, because again, Brock does whatever Brock wants. The UFC was probably chasing after him for a year, and Brock does what he does with the WWE and does with the UFC and strings him along and ups the price and ups the price and ups the price. So they only had a set amount of time. They did the best with what they could. The problem is their best wasn't good enough, and their best was completely against everything that they swore was going to happen to the fighters. Business did come before safety, is what I think in that opinion. Do I think the UFC is entitled to make mistakes? Absolutely. This was a risky one. It doesn't help that Mark Hunt and the UFC have had a tumultuous history, so it also seems like kind of a punishment.
Hmm. So I've read up on the information and the legal argument and everything, and you can't technically prove willful collusion between Lesnar
Right.
and the UFC. But what I can say that I do not like, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, is how Mark Hunt's words are being used against him. Because the man
Yeah.
said previously in a press conference or to a media member that he knows a lot of the UFC is dirty and that's just something you have to deal with. That just because he said that, that does not mean that that should fall on him to know that Brock Lesnar was dirty.
Right.
That
And
to me, that's zero.
it kind of means that I get what they, and again, without we're gonna end up just talking about the case like in like super detail. We'll be like two Matlocks all of a sudden. It'll be Law and Order on the Puncher Chance. But what it was John saying is exactly right. You can't complain about something that you acknowledge and then still sign up for, right? If I say, hey man, it's dangerous out there, but they're gonna pay me $500,000 to drive on these shitty roads, and I drive on those shitty roads and I get in an accident, and I'm like, fuck you, you owe me money. No, man, you said you knew it was going to happen. It doesn't mean that it isn't illegal, but they aren't going to use it against him at any cost, right? And they have hours and hours of footage of him and interviews. That being said, let's be honest here. What it's going to come down to is it's not going to be who's right and who's wrong. It's going to be who has the best lawyer. Mark Hunt is very
Unfortunately,
outspoken,
yeah.
unfortunately, yeah. And this happens, God, it happens in the music industry. It happens anywhere you go. It happened to Gian Gameshi. He had the better lawyer. Let's be honest. Like it happens to a lot of things. But unfortunately, Mark Hunt is going to have to. They're just going to. It's going to be a war of attrition that he's going to lose, right? Cannot be costing him a lot of. It must be costing him a shitload of money, and he's not fighting right now. So I don't know what his main source of income is, but I can tell you what's going to be the main source of what's withdrawing all that income and that revenue right now, and that's going to be these lawyer fees. So while I on a moral level, I agree with him. But I think that at some point the good fight becomes the stupid fight, and I feel like I don't even know at this. I was looking at the percentages of the further that it's like 60% less of a chance every time it goes to another appeal. So if he lost his first two appeals, it's highly doubtful he's going to lose the third one. I hope he does, but I also don't want to see a 45-year-old Mark Hunt fighting in some lower level league to pay off his legal bills, and that's what makes me the most afraid. So while I side with him on this, on a business definitely trumped fighter safety, and which should be paramount, but I think he's fighting a losing battle, and I don't want to see a washed up Mark Hunt do anything.
Yeah, no, there's definitely something that needs to happen here. Aside and taking Mark Hunt away from it, something needs to be done to protect the fighters. In my opinion, there needs to be a
Yeah.
fighters union. There needs to be, like we have the MLBPA, the NFLPA, the NHLPA. With the Players Association. You need a fighters association in the UFC, and I don't care what Dana White says about it.
Mhm.
I don't care how it gets done. It needs to happen because I like what Mark Hunt's lawyer said here. If this was a pitcher who was juicing up, throwing
Yeah.
108 miles an hour, and he hit someone in the head and killed them, then there would be a problem. And this is
Yeah.
the exact same thing. Brock Lesnar was juiced up, and if he punched Mark Hunt in the face in the right way with the right amount of force, because he has so much extra power from the steroids he was using, he could have killed him. And that is a
Yeah.
problem. You are putting your fighters at risk, and that is not a profitable way to run your business. So, last thing I'd say about it, we need a fighters association, plain and simple.
I agree with the association. I don't agree 100% with the unionization, because what I want is what right now the UFC doesn't have, they have fighters on their roster that can't fight anywhere else, but they're actually not UFC employees. They're independent contractors. And without getting into that whole spiel,
Yeah, WWE style.
exactly, right? But what I like is an association that allows for the groups to be consulted and the overall wishes of a lot of the fighters to get better healthcare and everything else. Good can come of it. I feel like the UFC is going to fight this for as long as they can, because what happens is once you get a bottom line, that bottom line to pay a fighter has to go up with inflation. And then the way that those things, I know Canada Post employees still on their first day walk into a $23 an hour job, right? Even though they're, dumber than the chair I'm sitting on, right? It takes away or overinflates the value. I'm not 100% pro union anymore. I think there are benefits with good unions, but I do like the way the NHLPA operates. I really like the way they do it in the NBA as well. So if we can have a model that's like those associations, I think there can be balance there.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about competitive wage and all that sort of stuff. I just want to protect the fighters. I don't.
Me too. Yeah.
In this situation, Mark Hunt, like as much as he walked in and he willfully walked in and he knew what was going on, maybe there was a little bit of pressure there. We don't know what his financial situation was like. We don't.
Why
know
would you say
any
no
of
to
that
that fight, right? If
right?
he he was probably, he maybe got pay-per-view points for that at
Yeah.
that point. Remember, a lot of fights fell off that card, and
Mm-hmm.
Brock, in a way, his fight kind of was saving it. So, I mean, Mark Hunt made a lot of money in the UFC, and I think he could have been treated better at the beginning. Remember, they famously wanted to buy his contract out, and he said no, right? And they wanted to pay 3 times the amount for him not to fight, but he wanted to fight out his contract and became a star. So they've had a problem since the very beginning. But I think that ultimately, you're right. I want to see the fighters protected, but I have also, there's something about also making as much money as you possibly can. And yeah, I mean, it's a complicated, convoluted thing for another time, but I think we're probably 10 years away from that.
Okay. So you said he's 45. Do we ever see Mark Hunt again in the UFC, or is he done?
I don't think, not after this.
Yeah. Okay. All
Well,
right.
depend. I mean, if we can find out how many fights are on his contract still, he might legally have to. Because
Yeah.
the one thing we know about the UFC is that they don't let contracts go very easy unless your name is Cory Anderson. Segue.
Well, that's what I was about to get into. I was just like, just a couple more things before we get out of here.
Yeah.
First up, Cory Anderson.
Like how I did that, eh? I was like, I know where you're going next. I'm like, watch this shit.
That was beautiful. Thanks, you did the transition
Thanks,
for me. Cory has his first bout scheduled at Bellator, and it's not a walk in the park, eh?
What did Cory did Scott Coker have a conversation with Dana White, and he's like, listen, thank you so much, and Dana's like, I'll give him to you for cheap, but listen, I want you to put him in with just a beast. And then Scott Coker's like, sure, Dana. And I'm picturing this evil, like spy versus spy kind
They're
of
a cabal,
conversation.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like they had this guy from Inspector Gadget and his fucking his cat. Anyways, yeah, man. But you know what though? I did like this. I thought about it like, hey, Cory Anderson, what did Cory Anderson ever do to Scott Coker in Bellator? But then I got this. You know what? What's the name you can give Cory Anderson that isn't a marquee fighter for them? And you don't want any of your stars to lose. The book's been written on how to beat Melvin Manhoff. Cory Anderson is that kind of fighter, but if one of those punches lands, he's going to sleep. Manhoff's a little older and has fought at lower weight classes traditionally when he's in the best shape of his life. So it looks good. Name value across the board is fantastic. Great headlining fight. It isn't Cory Anderson versus some no name in their light heavyweight division. It's Cory Anderson versus a name that's been synonymous with martial arts in Pride, in K1, in Strikeforce, and in Bellator. Melvin Manhoff is a notoriously horrifically devastating striker and has had some of the craziest performances. And I also love that Scott Coker's given a main event slot to one of the older kind of guard, the old generation of fighters. So it's going to be a tough one. But again, take down and beat him up and use your jiu-jitsu against Melvin Manhoff has been crazy successful for so many years. I can't see Cory Anderson doing anything different. But hey, they're treating him like a star, and Cory Anderson has earned that.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought and I just gained it back. The way I looked at it is they want Cory Anderson fighting for a strap. right? They see
Yes.
him as that
Oh yeah.
kind of guy. So if you give him a no-name guy and then you put him up for the strap, it's like, you handed it to him. So
Yeah.
if he makes his way through Manoff, right, then that automatically catapults him into title contention. And
Yeah.
is Bader still the champion there at Bellator at that weight
Bader's still a
class?
two. No, so Bader's still the heavyweight champion, but he lost to
Okay.
205 Strive. But you still got Lyoto Machida, Ryan Bader, Phil Davis, Gegard Mousasi has fought at 205 before. I'm missing a whole bunch of people. Litton Vassell and all these different fighters who are there who are good, decent matchups. Phil Davis versus Cory Anderson, it would be two of the exact same fighter fighting each other. It'd be at least interesting to see, right? So there's options there.
Yeah, I got to be honest, man. I never was a big Bellator fan. Always just a guy who checked into UFC and watched UFC
Sure.
all the time. But I've been on the Cory Anderson hype train a little bit, and
Yeah,
I
man.
think I'm going to be watching this one. And if Anderson can pull out the win, Bellator may have just earned a new fan.
Honestly, Bellator's done a really good job with what they do. But when Bellator under Bjorn Ramsey, the other owner, the previous president, it tried to be more than what it was, and it didn't really. It lost that luster of like marquee names, but people like Eddie Alvarez have come from Bellator and Hector Lombard, but there was few and far between. What Scott Coker, who was the former president and I think and chief operating officer of Strikeforce, and I think Elite XC as well. Scott's a synonymous name with martial arts, very respectful, and also doesn't take shit from Dana White. Like he'll give it back as much as he takes it, but is big on building talent and building star power. And Scott Coker has done that well in the past. He created the enigma that was Nick Diaz. Like he did that, right? He found Ronda Rousey. He found Cyborg. He found Gina Carano, right? Like he found these unbelievable Jorge Masvidal. He did the Kimbo fights. Like he knows what he's doing, and he knows what he has, and knows how to use it wisely. I love that he does the Strikeforce or the Grand Prix thing. I love that tournament style. It's so interesting. And he's Fedor's guy, and Fedor's my ultimate favorite fighter. But what I love is that he makes good decisions, and he has the fighter's best interest in mind at all times. And I think that what he's doing now with keeping some of these old guys around for their name value, but giving them good fights, whereas you see the UFC kind of uses a younger guy against an older guy to kind of catapult the younger guy, and it rubs people the wrong way. Bellator doesn't do that. It's almost like a bit of a legends league in a way where, like, I wanted to see Chael Sonnen fight Lyoto Machida. Like, I just wanted to see how that was going to go. I wanted to see Chael Sonnen fight Rampage. I wanted to see Chael Sonnen fight Ryan Bader. Like, I wanted to see those fights because I couldn't get them in the UFC because it's so crazy competitive. So Cory Anderson, I can list off 5 interesting fights for him. And who's to say that Cory Anderson doesn't want to drop down to 185 and fight someone there? Because he's a pretty big 205er, but he can get down to 185, I think. So I like what Bellator is doing now. Reminds me of the heyday of Strikeforce, and Strikeforce impressed the UFC enough that they bought it. So they're doing something right.
Sorry, just looking something up here, and there was one more thing I wanted to get into before. Now, did Carlos Condit fight on the last card of the Holly Holm card?
Yeah, and he looked
Yes.
fucking good.
I was just gonna say Carlos Condit had looked. I wanted to get the name right, but I
Court
bet
McGee.
against him. I bet against him, man. In that fight because I was like, yeah, he was great, but will he be? And he shut my mouth real quick, man. He was amazing, and this guy could be on the trek for another belt.
I'm telling you, I have the greatest UFC Carlos Condit and Robbie Lawler theory, right? Both those guys, if you haven't seen the Carlos Condit Robbie Lawler fight, it's insane. Robbie Lawler went on to have another barn burner with Rory McDonald, so he's got 2. Either one of those guys were ever the same after they fought, right? And I mean this. Carlos Condit had a fucking war with Robbie Lawler, right? A little clearer than the Rory McDonald fight, but had a war. And it was such a great fight, especially the 5th round. If anyone's listening to this, go find that fight any way you can. Those guys basically did not end up winning again, except for when Carlos Condit just won. Robbie Lawler has not won since. Carlos Condit has not won since. And they were mentally and somewhat physically never the same. Little gun shy, couldn't get their head around it. And these are guys that used to just bang, And I don't know what happened in that fight. Maybe it was more than what we saw in the octagon, but something happened to those guys because they've had a hard road back. They're both similar ages. They've had similar trajectories, but something happened in that fight. I swear to God that. But when Carlos Condit was fighting Court McGee, I thought good opponent, but a hard guy to really finish. When he knocked down Court McGee at the end of the first round, I swear to God, I jumped up like it was the end of Rocky IV. I was just like, what? Like I was like, I haven't been that excited since I think maybe honestly since Conor dropped Jose Aldo.
Dude,
Jose
he
Aldo.
relocated his nose
It
over
was
here.
crazy.
And then in the second round, he punched him so hard from this way, he put it back in place, and
Yeah,
his beard was dyed red from all the blood that
it was
poured out of his
crazy.
nose. It
But
was
when he knocked him
insane.
down, it was
Oh,
one
man.
of those UFC moments where, like, you know, I've been I tell you all the time, like I've got such a soft spot for the old fighters, and like Carlos Condit, I'll have a quick story here, but my dad's no longer with us, and at UFC 129, which was in the first fight that we did in Toronto, and there's 55,000 people. Like my dad and I were going to that for sure. We had to go to that thing, right? So we went down, and I got the whole UFC Fan Expo, did the whole thing. I still have the passes, got amazing photos, had a face off with Shane Carwin, met Cowboy Cerrone, the best weekend ever for UFC fan. So my dad and I were having some beers, watching the fight, because again, I think they had like 17 fights on there. It was the longest time I've ever spent in the Sky Dome, and I've been there for like an extra inning games before with the Blue Jays. But it was such a long day, and we're having some drinks. We were going up for a smoke, and we found the service elevator, which you're not supposed to use. You're supposed to walk down, but we just kind of like got chummy with the guy that operated it, so he was letting us go down, like just us, right? But he told us we had to have our GSP like karate headbands on at all times if we're gonna ride the elevator. So I was like, okay, that's weird. So we get into the elevator, we're heading down, and we hear some people like, stop the elevator, stop the elevator. So we put our hands out. We're like, oh, shit. My dad and I have had more than a few, soda pops. And in walks Greg Jackson, Jon Jones, but he's on the phone. And then who else was it at the time? Diego Sanchez. Anyway, and I just noticed Carlos Condit. And this is when Jon Jones was Jon Jones. But I was like, holy fuck, it's Carlos Condit. But he's got a squeeze between my dad and I because the service elevator is getting full of big guys, right? And I've had a few drinks, and I was just like, I said something along the lines of like, so 170, like, fucking GSP, just not 100% there, but basically being like, I'm Canadian, I have the greatest 170 pounder. And he turns to me and he goes, young man, right? And I'm like a year and a half older than Carlos Condit. He's like, I'd do anything to trade places with you. And I was like, why is that? He's like, well, because then I could be the drunk asshole and you could be the good looking in shape fighter.
Oh my goodness.
And
that's so good.
And my dad goes, hey, that's my son you're talking to. And he's like, sir? And he's like, no, good point. Solid. and Carlos is a pretty straightforward, and we laughed the whole way down there, and as they got out, I was just saying, hey, thanks. And he said to me, he's like, do you want an autograph or a photo or whatever? And I was like, no, man, I just wanted to bust your balls. I think you're a fucking amazing fighter. And we shook hands and I had a great time. But for a guy that serious to have such a good, witty sense of humor, and and he obviously knew I was kidding. I wasn't trying to be an asshole, but Canadian humor and all that stuff. And he was just such a nice guy to me and my dad. And he just was like, enjoy the fights. And we kind of saw them, and like we'd nod heads when we crossed paths again. And we saw him at the expo earlier, and he was just an all-around good guy. So the guys that you meet and you have those interactions with, you have just even a more soft spot for. And I just have a great memory of Carlos Condit. So when he has a performance like that, and he looked very, very sharp, and maybe that mental game has come back after some time off, he didn't have a bigger fan in his corner than me. I swear to God, when he floored him in the first round, I was on another level.
So if that first round was 12 seconds longer, there's no way McGee survives it.
Dead. And Carlos Condit is a ruthless finisher.
Yeah. Okay. So before we stop talking about the last UFC on ESPN, Holm versus Aldana, I gotta give it to my girl Holly Holm. I wasn't with her. I bet on Aldana. That was a horrible card for me, as you can tell. I bet against Condit. I bet against Holm. But boy, oh boy, did Holly Holm come out and go bell to bell and win every single point of
Oh
every
my God.
single round. And I have
Yeah.
never seen a fighter dominate a 5-round fight like that.
It was unbelievable. Honestly, the way that Holly turned it up at the I think the last minute or so in the fifth round, or the whole fifth round, she didn't pick her foot off the gas. She was going for a finish. To see that happen to Holly, what made me very, very happy, because she's one of the nicest people in this sport, and she's worked so hard, and she's been a combat athlete forever. And to absolutely shut out the next big thing in that division the way that she did, it just shows you what the famous Daniel Cormier quote, right? There's levels to this. There's levels to this. And she saw, it was obvious that Aldana was going to cut off the cage a certain way. Holly saw it, adjusted, but Aldana never readjusted, and it just ended up being a masterclass, 100% masterclass in every way, shape, and form for Holly Holm.
Yeah, it was an excellent fight, and I enjoyed losing money on it because she had my attention, from, like I said, from bell to bell, horn to horn, whatever you want to call it. Holly Holm, I bow down to you. You were
Amazing
an excellent,
performance.
amazing performance, and can't wait to watch you again, because it's back-to-back wins now, I believe, for Holm, right?
Yeah,
So
she's put
on
it
the trek
together.
back to maybe another bantamweight championship. Who knows? We know who's there. We know we know that it's tough, but Holly Holm definitely putting her name back into that
Sticking
contention.
around.
We would not be a very good Canadian MMA show if we did not
Yes.
mention Canadian MMA content. And you
Right.
sent me a link today, or not today, a couple days ago. We've got a Canadian making his MMA debut, or his UFC debut, out of Edmonton. I'm gonna butcher his name, so I'll let you take that.
Oh my God, please don't.
But I believe it's KB Brullier.
Or Brulia, or yeah.
But yeah, can you tell me a little bit about this guy, and tell the Puncher's Chance listeners what they should expect from him?
Well, I gotta say, this is one of the ones that kind of caught me off surprise too, because KB is a fighter that went completely under our radar. Now I know we do our best to stay on top of things, but at the same time, we can't
We
do.
have other jobs.
We have other jobs. Yes. This was actually an article that was posted in the CBC, and I had no idea, because I don't know if it was promoted that way on Dana White's Contender Series. Like, that's where we saw um, this middleweight from Canada sort of debut. But I don't remember it being advertised that way. When TJ Laramie had his debut, it was Canada, 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 Canada. I didn't get that from KB Billar. What I do like about it is that so far, from what I understand, he's been fighting a lot of UFC veterans in other organizations. So he fought Matt Dwyer and beat him in a unanimous decision for a company called Unified MMA 38. So he was recovering from surgery for a little while, which kind of stopped his hype train when he was putting all these wins together. He's an undefeated 28-year-old guy from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. The guy is 6'4", so you're looking at a guy who's almost or equally as tall as Israel Adesanya in that division. And what I love about this is that he's one of those like strike heavy, ground heavy fighters. So it's not like we have another one trick pony. What I liked about, I went back and watched his performance, and although it was a little bit on the reserved side, I thought he looked good. I thought he was good representation. Looks like he's very well rounded, very comfortable, cutting off angles, trying to work his clinch game, all that stuff. So I'm excited to see how he does in the octagon. Again, we're worried about like ring rust and stuff like that might be an issue. Obviously, going all the way to Fight Island ends up having another wrinkle, but they gave him top of the prelim cards against an absolute no bullshit individual, the Octopus from England, Tom Breeze. Now, I feel like they're building Breeze on top of KB here, but they're matched up pretty well. And Tom Breeze has more experience, more UFC experience, more wins. I think he's fought at least 5, 6, 7 times in the UFC. He is coming off a loss. He lost on that Benavidez Figueiredo card back in February.
Yeah.
So he lost by a TKO. He's kind of been trading fights, like losing, winning, losing, winning. So may the best man further their career. But my money would be on KB being the younger, faster, taller, with the reach advantage. But I'd be excited to see him. He got unbelievable placement. If he's going to make a splash, it's got to be where this is on this card.
Okay, well, before we get out of here, I figure I should just give another television review, another TV review, seeing as that's what we were doing, a little bit of lightheartedness to end it. I got to tell you, man, I've been checking, I've, been isolated in the house. Like I said, I work and I come home. I work, I come home, and I spend more time in the house than I ever have in my entire life. But I am losing a little bit of weight, which is good about that, trying to do that COVID life stuff. But I have checked out this show. It's a show from America, and it's called Tell Me a Story. It is a show that is loosely based around the fairy tales. So I don't know if you've heard about the show Grimm.
No. I do that show.
So the main character from Grimm is in season 1, the cop, and it's basically kind of like Grimm, but there's no monsters or anything. It's all real world humans telling stories like Hansel and Gretel, the Three Little Pigs, et cetera, right? And man, they took the child locks off this thing. I'm telling you, there was murder, there was some gore, there was some excellent stuff. So if you're looking for a good little show that it's for the adults, it's not for the younger children, check out Tell Me a Story. 2 seasons, and it's available online. So,
and this isn't like Once Upon a Time where they like
no,
this is gonna be like real shit.
This is real shit. I'll tell you, the opening episode, it starts off with a jewelry heist with 3 guys who run into the store wearing pig masks, 3 little pigs.
Oh my god! Okay,
right.
Nice.
So so it is a legit. It had me from episode number 1. So make sure you check out Tell Me a Story, and obviously check out the Puncher's Chance podcast. Your boys, we're here every week, and
you gotta stop. News is breaking in the middle of the goddamn show.
In the middle of the show, what happened?
Rafael dos Anjos announces UFC 254 withdrawal after positive COVID-19 test. He was fighting, I think, Islam Makhachev. He was fighting somebody. But he just literally 8:16. We were already fucking recording this shit.
8:16. No Rafael dos Anjos.
Yeah, man.
On his next fight, who do you think they would replace him with?
I have no idea, man.
Or will they just wipe the fight?
They'll probably wipe the fight. But man, that's one of Khabib's boys making his debut against RDA. He has main card placement. He was the third last fight. It was gonna go RDA and Islam, then Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, and then Khabib versus Gaethje. So he was one of the last 3 fights. I imagine they're gonna move up Walt Harris and Alexander Volkov now, put the heavyweights there. But man, that's a blow. That's a guy looking to make his name off RDA. Haven't seen RDA since January when he lost to Chiesa.
I gotta say, if this is one of Khabib's boys, I think that Khabib might try and do anything he can to keep him on the card, right? Let's try and get a fighter in there. So we'll wait and see. We'll hit on that on the next episode of the Puncher's Chance.
Yeah.
Bad news for dos Anjos.
Look at us breaking news over here, eh? Look at us.
Hopefully,
you want to get your info. You got to go to the Puncher's Chance, man.
That's it, man. Hopefully, dos Anjos is okay. No symptoms. Hopefully, he's asymptomatic, but he has tested positive. He will be off that fight card, off the Khabib fight card. So hopefully that we still see Khabib's boy get his break. Maybe it won't be against dos Anjos. It won't be against a big name, but maybe they can get him in there and he can get a finish. We don't know, but
we'll see.
That's all we got for this week on the Puncher's Chance podcast. Make sure to check us out. We're normally recording on Tuesdays, but this time it's a Thursday. We'll be back next week with more news on dos Anjos and everything else surrounding in the UFC. Thanks to everyone for watching. As always, you can get me on Twitter at John Lodge Music. You can find Jordan Grenke at Jordan Grenke on Twitter, and you can make sure to leave comments, like, subscribe, do all of that. If you've got something you want to hear, let us know. We love you guys. Thanks for listening. We're out of here.
See you guys. Enjoy the fights.